So these were. I mean, it's a really interesting book because obviously it's replete with the whole history of women after the war and how they were treated effectively by men and the difference they made and the untold stories, as it were, that people don't know about. And we rely on people like you to bring them to life. So you had Adelaide Hawkins, who I think was a specialist in crypto work. If you
Yes.
give me a
So
sort of
she
quick portrait of each of the women, Adelaide Hawkins was crypto, as it were.
Adelaide Hawkins has an interesting history because she was a single mom of 3 kids, and she really used this identity to shield her work as a spy. Nobody suspected that the single mom was actually an intelligence officer high up in the CIA. And so she started out in World War II. All of these worked first in World War II, and then rose in the ranks and became chief of covert communications. And she developed a plethora of really interesting spy gear, including tiny microdot cameras and a woman's compact that looked just like any regular mirror, but when held at an angle, it would reveal a secret code. So she had this fascinating history where she worked overseas. She was part of all of these different operations, but her family had no idea that she was actually part of the CIA. And it wasn't until after her death that they learned the role she had.
And the
Now she worked closely. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
no,
I
no,
was just going to keep talking about all these women.
we got you got Mary Hutchinson, who was Europe and Asia. You have Eloise Page, who I think was the Middle East, and you had Elizabeth Sudmeyer, who helped sort of the CIA understand how global terrorism networks worked. But I think what interests me as well is one bit I picked up from your book was the Petticoat Panel, which was set up in 1953 by these women. Am I right about that?
That's right. So these were women who worked in the high upper ranks of the CIA, but they were intelligence officers. So they were working in classic espionage operations, gathering intelligence. They had double agents all across the globe. However, they noticed that they had a very difficult time getting promoted and getting salary increases. And this isn't surprising that women were paid less in the 1950s. But what was unusual was that these women were willing to do something about it. And so they started this panel in 1953, and they documented that women, although they were doing the same work as men, were getting paid about 3 times less. So they made many recommendations, all of which you can imagine were ignored and belittled by many of their male colleagues. But some of them did respect what these women were doing. And as they grew in the ranks, as they started to have more responsibilities, these women then brought in more women to work under them. And it's this legacy that has really made the agency what it is today, an agency that is half women with a woman, Avril Haines, at its helm.
And do you think that is so interesting? I hadn't appreciated that point. Do you think the CIA is sort of kind of I kind of don't know how to put this well or not, but ahead of the game, understanding much earlier than others what women brought to the craft of intelligence gathering? I mean, is that relatively unique, or did
It
others?
is. It was very different than other federal agencies at the time.
Mm.
And part of that is because of a man named William Donovan, who's considered the father of American intelligence. And as he was building American intelligence, which was still in its infancy during World War II, he relied very heavily on his UK colleagues to build up their operations. And one thing that he did was he felt that they needed people from different backgrounds. And he states this explicitly. He says, we need people from different racial origins, different backgrounds. And he felt that by having this diversity, it would strengthen their operations. And that's truly what we see. Because William Donovan hired so many women during World War II, you have women in places that were never suspected of being a spy. These women were often just seen as housewives or as secretaries. They weren't seen as threatening to the men that they worked alongside. And so they were able to gather a lot of intelligence.
I think it's such a brilliant story, and I think it's so interesting that the focus on diversity by the agency that keeps people safe was seen 50 or 60 years ago, at a time when now too many people still regard pushing for diversity in their organizations as somehow giving into a woke agenda. So I think that is fascinating.